You guys excited? It's pretty exciting right now.
It's different with no music, huh?
It's very different with no music.
Summer. Thursday.
The opposite of summer.
Yeah.
Somber.
Oh, weird. You got it, mister.
Okay. You wouldn't know it, but things are starting to happen. Top of the hour.
Are we going to hear the...
Now it's showtime.
Are we going to hear the...
Yeah.
It's Johnjay and Rich. Phone number's 877-937-1047. You can text us. Text JJR, whatever you want to say, to the number 96893. Now, we have a podcast, and we dropped it yesterday. The podcast is called Afterwards. And it's like behind the scenes or just stuff that doesn't make it on the air. Maybe because it's a little bit too mature or it's time sensitive. We didn't have time to get to it on the show. And one of the things about the podcast is that there's no rules. Like, we can speak freely. We don't, put the radio filter on it. We just kind of go, right? And yesterday's podcast was really funny. It was funny for all of us in the studio, right? And sometimes when we do a podcast, I'll go, I wonder if that's funny if you're just listening to it. Because sometimes, like a lot of times when we do the actual radio show, like right now, I try to think, theater of the mind, because I know that nobody else is in here. Maybe they're in their car, or they're listening at the work, in the cubicle, or on the gym, on the treadmill, or in a bus, or wherever you're listening. So we try to paint the picture so you can get exactly what's going on. When we do the podcast, we just go, right? So Joey Bradfish was in here telling a story. Delaney was in here telling a story. And then I went off track on something about Joey Bradfish's hat that he had on. So yesterday, I decided I want to listen to the podcast and see if it's funny. And I was telling my wife about the podcast, and we had a 20-minute drive to my son's basketball game. So I said, let me put it on and listen to the podcast. Now, it's called Afterwards. You can get it on iHeartRadio, you can get Spotify, you can get it on JohnJayRich.com, you can get it wherever there's podcasts. It's called Afterwards. So at the same time, I love Waze, the app Waze. I think it's better than any other GPS thing. I mean, you always hear about the Uber people, the Lyft people, like the people who made Waze. Who are you? You always hear about Zuckerberg. You hear about the Waze people are amazing human beings, and the teamwork behind Waze. Like if there's a broken down car, or there's a cop, or there's a red light camera. Now, the thing about the Waze app, too, is that there's many different voices. You can use like the Siri voice or whatever. You can use Cookie Monster. I have it on Boy Band. I love the Boy Band app. And the Boy Band voice will tell you, turn left, turn right. Or it'll say like, police reported ahead. Right?
That's hilarious.
Yeah, I love it. And it's really good. And so my wife gets in the car and we're driving to my son's basketball game, and I'm telling her about the podcast. And I don't know if every car is like this, but when you're listening to the podcast and GPS starts, the podcast stops. Right?
Yeah, and the GPS goes over the audio.
Yeah, well, for in my car, it pauses whatever you're listening to, and then it starts back up, and you don't really miss anything. It's pretty impressive. Like, it'll pause the podcast, and then GPS speaks, and then it'll start the podcast. Right?
Oh, okay.
It's right.
It doesn't turn it down. It pauses.
It pauses it, and right on like to a perfect edit almost. Right. So yesterday, I'm driving to the game, and we're listening to us in the studio, and the part happens with Joey's hat, and the stupid podcast is playing, and the stupid Waze interrupts. And I'm listening to the momentum of the podcast, and it's like going and going, and like we're all starting to laugh, and I about to make fun of Joey's hat, and they're like, Joey, what's with your hat? Police reported ahead.
Oh, no.
And it's like, and I'm like looking at Blake, like ready to laugh, right? I'm like, see, she's laughing. And then it's interrupted by the thing. And then it's like, turn left. Like, the podcast can't even, it's almost like a horrible game to play. Because the anxiety I have wanting to hear if it's funny and then waiting to see her reaction, but it gets interrupted over and over and over. I just turned it off. I was so frustrated because it's such a good podcast, I think. I don't know.
How could you tell? The boy band kept interrupting.
It was funny in here. I mean, Suzette probably laughed tears for a good 10 minutes. Like, we lost her. She couldn't get it back together.
I lost it. And I was like, I want to hear it again because I think it's the most hilarious thing. But yeah, I mean, it's because we were in here and we were looking at Joey's hat. So I don't know how it is for everyone else that listens to the podcast.
Well, after I listened to part of it, then I showed my wife the picture you sent me, Suzette, of Joey's hat with the drawings on it that you wrote.
Yeah.
And then she laughed hysterically.
Okay,
so I was like, okay, so is that posted anywhere so it can back up?
No, that was just me messing around, and I sent it to you and Joey.
Well, we need to post a picture of something of that hat so people, because with her hearing the Chopped Up podcast and then she saw the picture, she laughed. So, because of stupid ways.
So she couldn't give you like a good review after hearing the podcast?
It was impossible because Waze interrupted. Because, I mean, it was bumper to bumper traffic, and it was like, I would go, turn right. And I'm like, okay, hold, stop. Turn left, police reported. Then it would go, red light, camera. Red light, camera. You should hear the thing that the stupid Waze says. So frustrating.
It would drive me crazy.
I know.